let's start. Um, so today I would like to welcome Pedro Carmo. Pedro Carmo is Pedro Carmo is graduated in economics, and he has also training in USA and England.
Yes.
He's the director of sourcing in Diamond International, and he has a huge experience in food retail, in FMCG, so everything related with sourcing and with trading food, food, food goods. Okay, so Pedro, welcome. Thank you very much. It's the third year that Pedro is here with us, always with a very good feedback. So please.
Okay. So thank you for the invite, Eunice. Like Eunice said, my name is Pedro. I'm Portuguese. I'm graduated in economics. I have an MBA in agribusiness and food management. Been studying before in the US and in the UK. I've worked also pretty much all my life around retail FMCG. So my experience, pretty much 80% of it, is in retail supermarket chains. So my environment has been working in different retail supermarket chains during these 20-something years of experience that I have. Right now, I work in Damon. Damon is a US-based company. Is a company that is specialized in developing private brand items, products, and from different product categories for different retailers that around the world that are located in different locations around the world. And what I'm going to do here today with you guys is to share a little bit of a number of concepts that I believe not being the ones that you study. I understand that most of you will be food engineers, will be something around that realm of expertise. But I do feel that one big potential road that you have ahead is working with these type of companies or with manufacturers and suppliers that also engage heavily with these type of companies. Okay, so today we're going to have a session where I'm going to share a little bit of some of the concepts that, not being technical driven, are part of the process. And I'm going to do all of this related with the experience that I have. Okay, so bear in mind, but that we will pretty much always be talking about the environment of a retail supermarket chain. So the ones like Pingo Doce, Continental, Lidl, all the supermarkets that you guys typically go, around the idea of private brand, which is something that you probably already cross your minds and your buying behavior with. Potentially all of you guys buy a lot of different private brand products every time that you go to a supermarket. And with that, we're going to talk about sourcing models, negotiation, product development, supplier relationship models, the development process of a product, and then I will show you some of the cases that I've worked in the past, so that you can have a little bit of an idea of how all of these interact. Okay, what are the interactions between different concepts? What are the impacts that changing one thing will have in other parts of the supply chain and the value chain? And with that, hopefully, you can have a little bit more of an idea of how this world of private brands can or cannot be something that you want to pursue in the future. Okay, so all of this negotiation, supplier relationship models, product development, sustainability, national brand, private brand, is what I do currently. And the company, like I've told you, is a US-based company that for 50 years has been developing private brands for retailers around the world. So we have a number of clients in the US, Whole Foods, Kroger, Wegmans, so big house names that are US-based retailers, but also in Europe, where I'm based, and we have an international development center in Lisbon. that provides services for the clients that we have in the international region. Okay, so we have from Lisbon, we support operations in the Philippines, in China, in Singapore, in the Middle East, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, also North Africa. We work here in Europe with Amazon, developing private brands for them. So for you to have an idea, in the end of the day, we act like a service hub for the field teams that we have in those markets where we have clients. So every time that we have clients, we have field teams that work with our clients' teams to reach a specific goal. That goal is always related with private brand development, which is, in the end of the day, having private brands products on shelf for these retailers. Okay, so uh, and you might be wondering how this can or cannot be interesting for a food engineer. I'm not an engineer, not a food engineer. My background is, like I mentioned, economics, it's management. But in this process of private brand development, the food engineer has a critical role. Okay, so each and every time that we think on a great retailer that has a very good private brand program, and in Portugal we can look pretty much all over the landscape because Portugal is a very advanced market for private brands and for retail. So our retail industry and our retail sector is very developed. We have very great companies that are leading in a number of innovations. In terms of supply chain, the country is very well prepared. So we have a very strong retail sector that employs a lot of people. But all these companies that are developing private brands as a strategic pillar of their strategy have great teams of food engineers, of quality, of compliance, because a big part of what is right now the strategy for a number of retailers is to have a strong private brand program. If you think any supermarket can sell the same Coca-Cola that the other supermarket has, but private brand gives supermarkets this opportunity and this possibility to have unique items, unique flavors, unique packaging, unique offers, at least for a period of time until they are copied by their competitors, because that happens. But it's a great way for these companies to understand how can they differentiate and how can they capture some new clients. And I'm going to show you some cases in the end, and that some of them are have impacted me directly, how a simple product can become a loyalty driven for a supermarket. How a simple product or some product categories can lead you to choose supermarket A over supermarket B because you like more that product. And it's not ever, not always, sorry, a matter of price. Sometimes you decide that because that product suits you better and your needs and your the way that you use it in your kitchen or in your home. So in the end of the day, like I mentioned, food engineers are a big part of this. They need to understand clearly what is the process, how the process interacts in the different dimensions, so that they can indeed become a big part of it. And in the future, hopefully, you do not only focus on developing your activities as food engineers, doing all the consumer panels or the chemical analysis or understanding the nutritional flavor or the ingredients list and all of that, because that's the big chunk of what you guys will be doing, but also understanding the entire process and how you can contribute in some situations for that process to change, because organizations are living environments that not always everything is super clear or super written on stone. And sometimes there will be a number of projects that you need to understand, have a broader view so that you can also collaborate for some change that the organization might need. Okay? So this is the staging or setting the stage for what we're going to talk. And right now, I would like to ask you guys what you guys feel about private brands. What are private brands for you guys? Do you have a clear idea of what are these products that you find in supermarkets? Don't be shy. You can say in Portuguese if you want. Valentina, in Italian, no, but no ideas. Okay, so private brands pretty much are all the products that you can find in the supermarket that are exclusively sold by that supermarket. They can be produced by companies that the supermarket owns, and in some cases we have supermarkets that we call that vertical integration, where they own a number of industries that they feel that are strategic, and they sell products that they also produce in companies that are part of their holdings. But in the end of the day, these are products that, even though that they are manufactured by a regular supplier, they can only be found in their shape and form in that specific supermarket and brand in a lot of cases. So private brands, yeah, go. Mhm. So that's a good question. In the end of the day, and I'm going to also to show you a little bit about this idea, this evolution about the names that we give to things. So private brands and marca branca are the same. Private brands
You
and
cannot sell that to a retailer.
yeah,
Because you will be very mad.
yeah. Right now, the evolution, and if you think so, when this movement started, the movement started with private brands with that name. Why? Because in that moment, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, indeed the brands that used this space were private brands, were white labels, white marcas brancas. Why? Because in a lot of cases, retailers did not invest in nothing but having a sticker that typically would be white with the name of the product. And the only criteria by then, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, if you talk a market like Portugal, was about price. Okay, so they would be using surplus productions from different suppliers that they could not put in the market, and they would put a sticker, a white sticker, and that designation started there. However, with the evolution of all the things that are around private brands, we don't no longer call it private brands. Some companies call them own labels, others call them private labels. In Damon, we call them private brands. Why? Because in the end of the day, today, for very mature retailers, they treat these products as a brand. So they have launch plans, they have communication plans, they have really strong criteria, and they have these products that are developed really aligned with the consumer trends that are on the market. And those behaviors are typically from a brand. So that's why right now we don't call it white label. So in the end of the day, this is something that has been developing for several years now. And right now, we are living in an era where in Europe is the strongest continent in terms of private brands. So it's in Europe where retailers, a portion of their sales, typically between 30 and 40% of the annual sales, come from private brands. While if you go to the US, it's around 15%. If you go to Latin America, 5%. If you go to Asia, 3 or 4 or 5%. So there are different realities around the world, but the reality is that Europe has the most developed market in terms of private brands. Okay, so if we think about private brands, we're thinking about, and the development of private brands, we're thinking about a process. Okay, so when you see the presentation or in any other searches that you might do around this subject, NPD stands for New Product Development, and this is the art and soul of private brands development. So it's a process that is very systematic, that has the contributions of different departments from the company. So we go from the interaction with product developers, quality managers, supply chain managers, marketing managers. All of them contribute to this process, so that in the end of a period of time, typically between 6 to 9 months, a product idea that started with a briefing, that started with the analysis of a category, uh, becomes a reality and is able to be sold in any shelf of the supermarket chain. So if you think about the NPD process, and that's where for sure all these managers will be interacting, it will always start with the definition that the commercial strategy defines for some specific category. When I speak about categories, you need to think about supermarket corridors, aisles, okay, aisles. Okay, so a category is something, it's a business inside a supermarket. So a category can be juices and beverages, can be dairy and cheeses, can be the yogurts, can be meat, can be fish, can be rice, groceries. So all of those small areas in the supermarket are what we call categories. And those are the micro businesses within the larger business that is a supermarket. So the new product development process, you need to think that this process will be done pretty much for all the categories that you find in a supermarket. So all the category managers have the need every year, every 2 years, to revise the strategy of their category, to understand how the market is going and if they have the right assortment, the right product offer for the market where they are. So everything will start with the definition that commercial strategy of a specific retailer has. And again, there will be strategies that are driven by low price, others by great design, others by great health claims on the products. So strategies are very diverse, and sometimes in the same supermarket chain, you can have categories with different strategies because they adapt with what the client of that specific product wants and needs. So after that definition of the commercial strategy, we typically dive into what we call the category assessment and understanding what are the needs of that category. In that moment, you'll be always looking for your competitor. You'll be always looking for the best practices that you can find around the world. You'll be always looking for a great retailer that is your main benchmark, so that you can understand what type of products you would ideally like to develop. And that stage is where typically a list of needs will be found by everyone that participates in this initial brainstorming process. From that list, a briefing will be done for every product, and that briefing is saying, okay, I want to have a product with 1 kilo that is packed in this type of packaging that can be organic or not organic, that can be sold until €2 per unit, that can be produced in Portugal or close to Portugal. So all the criteria that you can remember are typically decided or discussed at this stage, so that the teams that are going after that solution can try to find a suitable manufacturer or supplier that is able to produce that specific item. So after all of this is done, we advance in the NPD process for the sourcing and procurement stage. What is sourcing and procurement? So it's the stage where the team that is responsible for developing this item is going to identify a number of manufacturers in the market that might be able to do that product. Okay, so that's what we call the vetting stage, where typically we are going to try to find, I don't know, 5, 10 suppliers that we feel might have the capacity to develop that item. When we have that list done, what we start doing, basically, we start developing all the contacts that we need to have. Pick up the phone, visit the factories, share the information with them, and ask if they can indeed be able to produce the item. They will answer yes, no, maybe, okay, and that's a process that we need to go through. Typically 3 to 4 weeks later, we will start receiving the proposals of those manufacturers. Okay, they will start saying, okay, I can do that product for you with these conditions, this type of packaging, the claims that I can do. I will not use forbidden ingredients because you asked me not to use forbidden ingredients, and my price is this. Okay, and I need this annual volume to have this price. Okay, and you start pretty much receiving all these different proposals, and you analyze them. After you analyze them, typically you'll have 2-3 good proposals that you shortlist of the starting group of suppliers, and those 2-3 typically proposals will advance for what we call the quality assessment stage. In the quality assessment stage, typically is where you guys or similar guys with your type of qualifications will take care of this, is where we will always be doing consumer panels with consumers, a universe of consumers that represent the consumers in that specific market, where different criteria of the product will be vetted. Vetted is approved. So they are going to taste the product. They are going to give a rating on different criteria that need to be tested, from taste, flavor, color, smell, whatever it's logic for that product to be tested. And then also the product, that sample of those shortlisted suppliers will be sent to a lab, either internal or external, where chemical analysis will be performed. A number of chemical analysis, they will be confirming salt levels, sugars, type of ingredients, if the ingredients list indeed represents what has been shared in the technical specs, the nutritional value. So all of those elements will be confirmed in this stage. So from this stage, what we had 2 or 3 suppliers going into this stage. After this stage, we have another qualifying factor. So those 2 or 3 will be ranked, okay, in terms of the results that they have in this. After they are ranked, it is time for the category owner, which is typically a manager of that category, or the commercial director or business unit manager that is part of that team, will then do the final negotiation. So they will talk with the 2 best suppliers or with the best supplier to try to find the best conditions of supply. Price, number of deliveries per week to all the warehouses, promotions eventually, type of packaging, when the product can be ready, timing, and all of that. When that is done, we advance for the final stage or the final stages of the process, which is branding and packaging design. So we have chosen a product, a recipe, we've chosen a manufacturer, and now we need to put the brand architecture that our company owns, and we are going to decide the type of packaging, the communication messages that we want in that item, and the design team typically will start working on all of this. This will take 8 to 12 weeks because there's a lot of things that need to be double checked in terms of colors, in terms of materials and all that. And when everything is done, we typically say the product is ready, okay? When the product is ready, we advance for the order, which typically will take place 2 to 3 to 4 weeks later, and then the products will be on shelf, okay? So this is a cycle that is repeated to thousands of items in private brands that you find in a supermarket. So if you go, that's why the departments, the private brand departments of these mature retailers that we have, Pingo Doce, Continente, Lidl, Aldi, Mercadona, are very heavy and very expert in this type of process, and they keep on doing it. So imagine that, and for instance, even Continente and Pingo Doce, they have very large assortments of private brand for several years now. However, over the last 10 years, there was this health trend that we all feel and hear about in different communication outlets. So that it was decided that pretty much everything that we sell needs to have a reduced amount of salt and sugar. So even though that Continente and Pingo Doce had private brand items that were very stable, top sellers for 10 years ago, in these last 10 years, they've done a big effort to try to work with their manufacturers to reformulate the items so that they can answer those demands the consumer and sometimes of the government, so that the items can have lower sugars, no saturated fats, and everything whatever they want to communicate. If you think, for instance, Pingo Doce has right now a strong communication around prepared meals. Okay, why? Because future generations will not cook. So if they will not cook, they will still need to be fed. If they can find good meals in the supermarket, for sure you guys will be buying them. But Pingo Doce, one of their criteria is I guarantee you that none of my meals that I prepare that you can buy fresh, refrigerated, or frozen has any additives or conservatives. That's something that is part of the Pingo Doce strategy. Okay, they want to have that and they want to communicate that to the consumer because they feel that the consumer is asking for those type of claims and criterias, and they communicate that heavily. If they do that for their private brands, that's a differentiating factor from Pingo Doce to other retailers that might not have the same type of offer. Okay, so but rest assured that Pingo Doce, Continente, and Mercadona, they all have very good practices and they all copy themselves. So if one starts with a trend, typically 6 months later, the other will be doing pretty much the same thing or very similar in terms of demands. Okay.
And just if you can share some years
Mm-hmm.
ago when Pingo Doce reformulated their own brand,
Mm-hmm.
it was Diamond that started
Mm-hmm.
the team doing that.
Yeah.
In what stage did you enter?
So when we I did not mention, but Damon is responsible for a big chunk of of all the private brand items that you find in Pingo Doce. So we've worked with Pingo Doce for 14 years, developing a big part of their offer, and this is what we did for them for all the items. So the process that I've shown, all our teams have participated with Pingo Doce teams in that moment, and when we identify that trend of healthy and that need of having specific claims as a differentiating factor for Pingo Doce, that was part of our work. We had some meetings, and we had discussions every year. We would have a number of meetings where we typically would align the commercial strategy with the private brand strategy. Why? Because again, it's very unique and it can be something that allows the supermarket to differentiate themselves from the competitor that has exactly or typically the same type of item. So it's a lot of things that you see there have been developed, and Damon grew the Pingo Doce private brand penetration from, I don't know, around 5% to almost 40%. 40%. So right now, Pingo Doce is one of the retailers in Portugal that has a very large percentage of their sales in private brands. The same with Continente. Continente is always super well developed. And I've worked also in Continente. That's why I also think that Continente is a great company for private brand, and they are even more broader than the majority of items. Why? Because Continente's strategy is for a vast assortment. So Continente plays in a strategy that they want to offer everything to every consumer. That's a strategy. It's not right or wrong. If it's a strategy and everything in the company is adapted to the strategy and the results appear, so that's good. But if you look, for instance, to Mercadona, Mercadona has, Continente might have 30,000 items in a supermarket, in an hypermarket. Mercadona will have 3,000. Okay, so, and that is a big difference in terms of strategy. I cannot tell you which one is right or wrong. However, there's good things and bad things in all of them, and I'm going to discuss with you in the future some in the next slide some cases around Mercadona, so that you can understand that having sometimes a shorter assortment will bring a lot of different impacts in all the teams that are working around that. Supply chain, store operators, the category managers, the way that they interact with their suppliers is a completely different model. But again, the world is made of diversities, and we are here to have a lot of different models. If they, in the end of the year, they deliver the results of that the shareholders want to have, everything is good. Okay, so we're going now to discuss a little bit about what is commercial strategy. And commercial strategy is pretty much this: defines how a retailer competes in terms of price, differentiation, customer value proposition. So a lot of different factors can go into a commercial strategy. And in this case that we're talking about private brands, also is going to determine the role of private brands in the assortment, meaning I'm going to have a private brand that is price driven, or I'm going to have a private brand that is the best quality in the market, or I'm going to have a private brand that is the most healthier one in the market. Whatever it is part can be considered strategy.
And that's why sometimes we have their own brand and some exclusive brands. For example, like Continent and Continent Equilibrio, or Continent for groceries and Contemporal for wines. For example.
So that's part of the commercial strategy, because Continent decided to have a brand strategy, a brand architecture that is made of what we call a house of brands. So for different businesses within Continent, meaning business categories, they might have different brands. And you find, if you go to a Continent, you'll find the private brand Casa for household goods. You'll find Continente Equilibrio for healthy items. You'll find Continente Seleção for gourmet or premium items, sometimes even more expensive than A brands. You'll find other brands in Continente that are part of this strategy that they want to have, because they want to offer to all consumer segments. They want to offer to all different consumer revenue levels, and because also they have the space. It's also part of the heritage of Continent. So Continent is a supermarket chain with 40 years, I would say now. And they started with hypermarkets, and hypermarkets is their core business, and they have a lot of space in hypermarkets. So as you can imagine, you could not go into an hypermarket with the same type of assortment that you find in a Mercadona, because the experience would be awful. You will have corridors and corridors of the same item to have the space used. So again, after the commercial strategy, also talking a little bit about the sourcing models. And sourcing models, for me, it's very relevant. So we need to understand sourcing models is about how you engage, how these chains engage with the manufacturing industry. Okay, so if they are going to look for a local supplier or an international or regional supplier or an international supplier, what type of items they are going to buy in their own markets, what type of items they want to buy in foreign markets. Typically, I will also going to show you some cases how this can play a role. Product development, it's all about private brand development. The product development process is super relevant. Why? Because it's going to translate all the strategic goals, all the strategic ideas into products, and products will be, in the end of the day, the final measure of a strategy, if the strategy is going well or not. We'll also talk a little bit about negotiation and supplier relationship management. Why? Because cost, even though that might not be the main driver of a strategy, is always very important. I can have the greatest strategy on paper. If I do not have the cost that my consumer can pay for it, the strategy is bullshit. So packaging, again, also very important in terms of supply chain efficiency and in terms of consumer perception of that item. And in the end, also, I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainability, because it's a big trend that is impacting retail and how products are being developed over the next years. Okay, so very fast, in the end of the day, a well-developed business strategy that considers private label development. And I'm used here label. I shouldn't. I should use the brand, because that's where we are. Sourcing, negotiation, strategy, category management, and packaging will have a significant impact in how a company can compete in the market, okay? And also in terms of differentiating and loyalty, okay? Private brand is a loyalty instrument. In the end of the day, of course, it's a revenue it's a business activity, but a good private brand program needs to help that retail supermarket chain to become make their clients loyal to them because they like the products that they find, and differentiate themselves from their competitors. Okay, so like I was mentioning before, even though that private brands have been on shelf for several years now, consumer and societies keep evolving. And there are a lot of different things that happen every years, every 3 years, that impact how consumers look to products and how they want to interact, and how then companies can or cannot develop their supply. So in these last years, and I'm talking about a 2 to 3 years period, big mega trends have been impacting private brands. Uh, the tariffs of Trump are one of the most recent trends. The war disruptions, nearshoring and local sourcing, because it's something that happened also in the past. Inflation and cost pressure. So we all felt that, and for instance, I believe that everyone heard about eggs. So if you look at egg prices 4 years ago and right now, it's a completely different market. So the more than double the price and the cost, because prices do not double because retailers want to increase the prices. They double typically because production becomes more expensive, and then retailers, of course, they need to adjust that because they have a business, and businesses are made to generate a profit in the end of the day. Then the healthy living and free from trend is also a prevalent trend, again, driven by you guys. You guys are the ones owning this trend. You guys are the ones demanding supermarkets to develop items that are not heavy on sugar, heavy on fats, heavy on bad ingredients, okay? Functionality, how the items can be bought and how they adapt into your daily routines. The digitalization, so buying process is completely different right now than it was in the past. How many times that you guys are going to a supermarket and you're looking for a review on an item or trying to compare that item with any other item that you have in your mind. So very strong trend, not only looking but also promoting a lot of the items right now. So in the UK, I think it was Morrison's. Morrison's is already having products, private brand products that they have that somehow have become viral on TikTok, and they have a banner close to the item on shelf that says "as seen on TikTok." Okay, and that is type of digitalization impacts that answer and that are done specifically because your generation is having this buying behavior where you guys use a lot of different tools and information, and the retailers are adapting to that. That's what a trend is. Supplier relationship trends also evolving heavily. Private brands started with a very tactical approach on suppliers, on the relationship between suppliers and retailers. Right now, we do not have that. It's much more collaborative. Sustainability and ESG and innovation are the major trends that are impacting private brand development. Tariffs and wars, I'm not going to waste a lot of time, but for you guys to have an idea, are you seeing over there number one, number one, number one, number two, number three, number four, number whatever? So for you to have an idea, the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, has impacted so much supply chains, and this is a big part of the explanation why prices have risen so much over the last years. Okay, a big part of the supply of a lot of different items that European manufacturers would need raw materials to produce come from these markets, and these markets, even though that they can still produce part of it, they are not producing to the same levels. And in a lot of periods of these last 4 to 5 years, a lot of times they did not even have the capacity to perform the harvest of the goods. So manufacturers need to find potatoes in other locations. Manufacturers need to find those cereals in other locations, and this takes time. Time is money, and everything starts to increase. And then when things start to increase, it's very hard to come back to the previous level. So these are trends that are clearly impacting this. Nearshoring of sourcing activities. We had a period like 1.5 years ago where the containers that we were buying for our clients in China had increased 500%. So we had situations where 25,000 euros of goods inside the container were cheaper almost than the container freight, than the container cost. And that is super disrupting for a supply chain, as you can imagine. We need to have products, but sometimes the costs increase so much with all the problems that we had in Asia, with COVID, with different wars, with Suez Canal tensions, and all of that has a great impact because costs and prices increase dramatically. Then we had a lot of strikes. We have the US tariffs. So all of this demanded retailers to adapt their strategy. So they change in a lot of situations, to buy internationally, to buy in faraway markets, and try to find solutions near or closer to their own markets. So that's why we have observed over the last years a lot of efforts also to reshape or redesign the supply chain of different trade flows, because indeed, in a lot of relevant origin markets, it was not possible to buy any longer. The goods were taking more time to arrive. So we needed, and all the retailers had a big effort to identify local manufacturers that could be more secure and diminish the risk exposure. However, these local suppliers, in a lot of cases, they found those suppliers, but what we have in our Western world, higher wages, higher energy costs, higher regulamentations about environment. So the production of these goods in closer suppliers will be typically much more expensive than in international markets. So, and that is reflected in the end of the day as inflation, as something that the consumer, we all need to pay. So this is what happened, and again, there are advantages and disadvantages. You can think on several. Costs and the market origins are for sure one of them. Time to market and time from order into delivery is typically shorter when your supplier is closer to your business, but a lot of times local suppliers are not so driven to innovate and to find better solutions because they feel that they own the market. Okay, it's something that we also happen, that sometimes this activity needs indeed to have a strong competition, so that suppliers can push each others and advance in the type of offers that they have. Okay, so what can we do in terms of this trend and how can we adapt? In the end of the day, everything, what happened is that companies started to have backup plans. Okay, and that's very good to have backup plans, because we lived decades, the 90s and early 2000s were very stable decades where supply was very stable, and a lot of times retailers did not felt the need to be prepared to disruptive moments. And what happened over these last years was that preparation was done, and they found a lot of different manufacturers. And typically right now, in critical items, retailers will have a preferred supplier for sure, but a second and third that are somehow ready and compliant and already vetted, that can, from in 2 weeks time, potentially start supplying a specific item of that retailer. So in the end of the day, sourcing models will always be for retailers, because we're living in a global world, will always be mixed sourcing models. We'll always have a component that will be local and a component that will be global. And if we think in Portugal, for sure, the global component, typically the relationship that we have with global manufacturers, we're talking about raw materials. So if we need to buy coffee, we cannot buy coffee in Portugal. We need to go to the origin. Well, we can, but it will be more expensive. Rice, pasta, all of those goods, cereals, they are not produced over here. They are produced in South America. They're produced in Africa. They are produced in Asia, depending on the type of items that we're talking. And typically, it's very tactical, it's very transactional. So they establish the price and the retailers need to pay. So, and every year there's a negotiation, every year there's a tendering process. So that's the type of things that typically it falls on this tactical cooperation. When we're thinking about something that we feel more strategic to our strategy, to our business proposition, typically we should look to more local suppliers where we can visit their factories. We can have a better relationship with them. We can bring them into our offices, explain our strategy. And in that type of ecosystem is where the good ideas will be developed and where products can become a reality.
When we are looking at strategic partners, it means that we have less suppliers than.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So this is a very crowded area, okay? There are a lot of different suppliers that can offer over here. Over here, suppliers that have the abilities to become unique, it's a much smaller group of suppliers. And again, all of these strategies play a role for specific objectives that the category might have, okay? If we think another trend that is impacting private brands, inflation and cost pressure. So in the end of the day, and we all heard the news over the last years that the cost of goods has increased dramatically. Not only houses, but food is much more expensive than it used to be, much more expensive, and it grew a lot over last year. So that's something that is given. We cannot do it. So it's not on the retailer side. This is a value chain problem, and the retailer is part of the value chain. So if prices increases, are the reason or the justification for that is not only because the retailer wanted to increase. No, retailers, and one good thing about retail in Portugal, at least, and in a lot of different markets, is the competition is super heavy. So when I worked with Eunice in Continent, every Mondays from 9 to 10, my routine would be to look at a map that would show my category product prices against Pingo Doce similar prices. If I had one price that would be more expensive than Pingo Doce, if it was not Eunice, some other manager within the company would immediately tell me to decrease that price and to have that selling price exactly at the same level of Pingo Doce. So we typically would track a bunch of items that we felt that they were the most relevant for the consumer. And one of the definitions of our commercial strategy is that we want to match every player in the Portuguese market on these items. We want to have the lowest or at least a similar price to the lowest ones. And that's the good thing about competition in retail, because this happens quite a lot. And every Monday it was the first task that we would do. Because if, I don't know, if Eunice or anyone else would go to a supermarket and would see a specific item that is critical for sales, more expensive or less expensive than in Continent, she would immediately try to match that price, because the consumer in Portugal is very price sensitive. And if we are price sensitive, we need to fight for those sales. So that's for saying that.
That's why sometimes we have different
Formats, product formats,
product formats, and also brands. When we are looking to continent equilibrium, it means that we had something that is healthy, so it cannot
be compared with a basic item, and that item will generate a little bit more margin that, combined with the overall items of that category, can bring the margin objectives. Again, this is a business, so there will be every month a demand for margin and P&L type of budget results, that we need to have those type of strategies, either with our star product or with a number of stars that can contribute to the margin that we need to deliver. So in the end of the day, this to say that when prices increase, the we cannot blame the retailer, but it's a supply chain issue from production into shelf. And if you remember about Russia, that Russia and Ukraine slide, fertilizers. So this war was so impactful that even in the initial production stages of a lot of food items that we consume every day, the fertilizers increased so much their cost that it would be impossible that those increases would not be reflected on shelf. Okay, so we need to have these in consideration because in the end of the day, costs are always very important for any consumer around the world, and private brand also advances a lot in moments where costs are typically the key driver of a consumer. So when we hear a lot about costs and everything is more expensive and all of that, what we observe over the different periods that we've lived of economic inflation and increasing in costs is that the private brand increases their market share, meaning that consumers understand that in those moments they are more willing to change, I don't know, a Kellogg's Special K type of cereal for the similar type of item in private brand that will cost 40% less and has typically the same formulation, and in a lot of cases is done from the same factory. So it's these type of things that you need to think in terms of impacts of cost, in terms of how cost impacts private brands and the strategy. Healthy food, healthy living, and functional food. So these are trends that are always all a result of the new generation. So retailers are again using private brands to communicate really impactful healthy claims. You guys will be much more educated in terms of food ingredients lists and compositions than we were in the past. And if this is part of your buying behavior, retailers will adapt to it. Okay, we see here that Kroger has we believe in food as medicine, which is a very strong and bold statement, and they have a program around this idea that allows consumers to become more educated, to understand how they can use different things for different objectives that they might have. And with that, they are planting in the head of the consumer an idea that these guys not only sell me food, but they also help me in the objectives that I might have to become leaner or to have a better skin or to live more years, whatever it is. Okay, and this is part of the environment and how these will be shaping product development. Because if we say this, we cannot have items with high levels of sugar, with saturated fats, with forbidden ingredients, with dyes. In the US, the list of forbidden ingredients is monstrous. Okay, but if we compare it with Europe, we have much better food than in the US. So we have imagine a lot of we have 10,000 number of additives and things that we forbidden. They have typically 1,000. So the products in the US, we can have a product in Europe that has 3 ingredients, and the same product in the US might have 10 ingredients, which is because they put a lot of chemicals, they put a lot of flavor enhancers, they put a lot of conservatives, and it's part of their culture. They're now trying to change it a little bit, but it's also a reason why they are so heavily obese and they have all those problems. And then we have the sustainability, which is, again, for private brands and for product development, a big trend. Because, again, you guys are planet lovers. You guys are much more educated also to these type of problems. And right now, retailers are starting to demand from their manufacturers, from their supply chain partners, to confirm that they produce in a very sustainable manner. Either they have circular economy type of strategies, or they can prove that their carbon footprint is lowering year by year. So these type of activities will become more prevalent in retail, for sure, and for sure in terms of the production of private brand items. Not only private brands, because all the brands are trying to cope with this, but private brands are a front line on how the retailer can showcase to the market that they are doing that. And there are cases even where private brands, where retailers will say that their private brand is 100% sustainable, or that their private brand has decreased X% of the CO2 emissions. So different factors and objectives are coming into place around this idea. Again, going into price as a strategic role for private brands and for any commercial strategy, like I mentioned, and not losing a lot of time here. If we think on price, we need always to think about company, customer, and competition. Okay, price will be formed between the analysis of all these criteria. Okay, and we also need to understand the same that the consumer, when they feel pressured, will become as rational as we can. Okay, we are not stupid. We understand when the moments are critical, and we will adapt our behavior to that. And how are we going to understand what is the best price for a product that we want to offer in markets? Again, depending on the competition, on the strategy that we have, we might look to how the market looks at that item. Okay, if the item is a staple good or is a good that everyone uses, if the item is an innovative one or is a very basic one. So all of these considerations will be a reality when companies are trying to determine the best price for a product and for their commercial strategy. So an example, if you look at olive oils, you'll find a lot of different olive oils, but there will be several factors that will influence price and perception. Okay, if the packaging is in glass, dark glass or white glass, in plastic, a cheap plastic or a very qualitative plastic, the claims that they have, extra virgin, whatever it is. So there will be countries that will buy our olive oil that we have in Portugal, and will sell it 5 times more expensive. Why? Because olive oil in those markets is perceived as a very qualitative item, or that they use only when they do a salad, or to season a salad. While in other markets it's a completely different thing. If you come to Southern Europe, olive oil is used pretty much in everything that we use in our kitchen. So in the end of the day, to define a price, the optimal price level, I would say that one of the most relevant things is benchmarking. Again, we live in a very competitive environment, and you need always to benchmark, because the consumer, and in Portugal, is crazy, because you all know different people, and potentially some of you also do that sometimes we go to a specific supermarket to buy a specific item because it's in promotion, and then we can go to another supermarket to buy another item. We are very price sensitive, so benchmarking in Portugal for private brands is a key part of product development and how things can be done. And to enter this part of around negotiation, price is just an idea. In the end of the day, price is a result of a negotiation. Okay, we can have a price idea that we would like to have, but in the end of the day, this is part of a relationship that we have with the supplier. This used to happen quite often in Portugal, okay, where these guys would be the retailer, these guys would be the manufacturer, okay, but this was some years ago. Why? Because Portugal is a very small market, so anyone that has a factory needs to sell to Continental, to Pingo Doce. If they do not sell to one of these guys, they will have a problem, or the factory will have a small output. So in the past, the negotiation used to be very tactical, and the retailers would have a lot of power over manufacturers. Right now, they understand that those type of approaches are no longer valid. There are a lot of factors, there are a lot of other new suppliers that came into the market, and the relationship needs to be much more collaborative than it was in the past. And coming to the idea of marcas brancas that you mentioned in the beginning, so when we started, as you see, these are all white labels. These are all products that only have the product name, and in the 70s and 80s, they started like this. And we're now evolving over the into today's period where we have consumer brands. Private brands already are considered brands, and they have exactly the same type of development plans, communication plans, launch plans that some A brands have in the market. Of course, not heavily TV commercials, a lot of times not heavily outdoors, but the same idea, the same elements are in today's private brands. So that's why we no longer call them white labels or private labels. We call them brands because they go through a very similar process as we find in A brands, the Coca-Colas of this life, that we see in the market. So what influences negotiation? So if we think of every time that we go to negotiate with the manufacturer, we need to have a very good idea of how critical that item is for us and how complex is the supply of that item, okay? And those are two factors that we will mix so that we can pretty much have a different strategy on how we can negotiate with different suppliers or different manufacturers. Not all private brand items are the same. They have different objectives, and in the end of the day, the objectives that they have for the business is also are also how we are will determine how we are going to divide the suppliers that we're going to negotiate with. So we need to think on the products that we're selling in private brands and divide them in these four typical quadrants where we're going to have where the item is very critical for the business but is low complexity. Typically, the type of strategy that you're going to have with the supplier is a leverage type of strategy. So you're going to leverage your market power. You're going to look to have a short supply chain of number of manufacturers available, and you're going to negotiate aggressively. If the item is very complex in terms of supply, meaning it's hard to find, it's hard to develop, it's hard to deliver, but it's very critical to your business, you need to place it in the strategic bucket. And when you think of strategic items, you need to have different strategies on how to negotiate and how to collaborate. So relationships are relevant. And the same thing with other types of items. So not relevant and not not complex, typical, non-critical. So you're going to send the tenders every year, every 6 months, whenever you're going to have negotiation and in price. It's price driven, so the only thing that matters here is price. So you have a much more tactical relationship with them. And the same thing with bottleneck items. So bottleneck items are really hard to get items. However, they are not very critical for your definition, and you will need basically to minimize the risk of not having that item in your shelf. So all of this to say that strategies and retailers and the way that those strategies and those retailers behave and the objectives that they have will somehow impact how the teams negotiate with their suppliers. So this is a very broad categorization, so everything can be arguable over here, but I wanted to show you here because in the end of the day, all of these are legacy retailers in the Portuguese market. Mercadona is the new one, and Mercadona has a very unique and distinct model from all the other retailers. That's why I also am going to show you a case around Mercadona. But in the end of the day, if you think from this into there, we think on more tactical type of relationships, okay? So if my current supplier does not give me the price or the supply conditions or the packaging, I can change that supplier to another one. into a more strategic supplier. So typically where the company either has an investment in a factory or they have very close agreements where they say, I will buy all your production to this year, but you need to give me this price, you need to give me these conditions. And Mercadona acts a lot in that field of strategic collaboration. So the supplier relationship model, and I want to show you this because it indeed is different. The supplier relationship management strategy of Mercadona is what they call the inter-supplier. So Mercadona some years ago decided that they were going to invest vertically in a lot of different industries, okay? Meaning they have a number of factories in Spain that only produce to them. All the output of those factories, typically they would find factories with some uh, difficulties, economic difficulties. Mercadona will talk with them, will invest in the factory if the factory needed investment, and will say, okay, you are only going to produce these items for me in Spain. You can export with different formulation from what I'm telling you, but you only produce for me. And this was very strong because it gave Mercadona a lot of knowledge. Okay, Mercadona had a lot of knowledge, and Mercadona managers have a lot of knowledge in the items that they produce for several reasons. They spend every week 1 day in the factory talking with production managers, understanding how the product is done from A to Z, and that brings a lot of value. They have manufacturers that they develop in their labs unique formulations. Typically, a category manager in Mercadona will have, I don't know, 5 items to manage and 1 supplier to negotiate with. The same.
If you look at,
Yeah, please.
sorry, if you look at continent, for example, you can have a category manager for fruits that has to deal with all the fruits. If you look at
Mercadona,
a category manager of Mercadona can have 5 or 6 fruits maximum. Okay?
and that's super impactful
Yes.
in terms of time, in terms of knowledge, in terms of efficiency, in terms of negotiation output. If you can have a relationship with these guys only with 1 instead of having 10 guys to negotiate with, if you have 10 guys to negotiate with, you need 20 hours. If you have 1 guy to negotiate with, you need 2 hours. So that shows us that time, that time is money, and efficiency is a big part of how the models and strategies play a role in here. Again, that's why strategies can be good, can be bad. In the end of the day, is about the operationalization of the strategy.